All right. Well, I think everybody is here, and I mean everybody. We have a couple of new people who have joined the class since the last time we were together. So we are a little bit larger in numbers now, but I think we all managed to make it tonight, which is great. Um, Tonight, the main thing, well, I shouldn't say the main thing, two-thirds of the main thing tonight are that I want to do the first of our roundtable discussions. And these will be something, we may not do them every week that we're meeting together, but I do like to throw them in. And without giving too much away, part of the reason I'm doing it actually comes out of the topic that we are going to be talking about in in tonight's roundtable. So I just like to have these moments because this class is largely asynchronous. I do like to get these moments to just get a chance to have conversations and to talk to each other and so on. So that is the probably the biggest part of tonight. And then I do want to spend a little bit of tonight just kind of following up on Moodle, on a couple of technical things in Moodle. The main one being just taking a little bit of a closer look at the page resource. I would say by far, Moodle pages are the thing you're going to use the most in your projects. They're the main way that you can put content in front of students and organize it and so on. So there are just a couple of things that I want to hit in that as we start moving forward on the Moodle projects. And then after tonight, we won't meet the next 2 weeks. So it will be now a full 3 weeks until we meet in here again. And for several weeks or for several meetings after that, that'll be the main schedule, is basically every third week we'll be meeting in here. And then for those of you that are in my 520 class, those will be fitting in and we'll be meeting the weeks that we don't meet here. So before I get into a couple of things and before we get into the roundtable, I just wanted to see if anybody has questions, concerns. I've been fielding some emails and stuff over the course of the last couple of weeks, which is great. I want you guys to feel like, anytime you've got a question that you can get in touch with me. But if there's anything right now that's you would like to ask or get some more information on, feel free to chime in.
So if I'm getting that right, we're going to take that work we did and use that to plug into the Moodle?
Yes, the two ID plan pieces. Yes. So to kind of go back to one of the foundational elements of this class having to do with deficient design is, if we're going to use the technology, I want to make sure that we've got a really clear, solid plan in place before we start using the technology. So this instructional design plan was a way to experience the ADDIE model and also to make sure that you've got a really good handle on what your goals are, how you're planning on organizing your content and all, before we even start looking at the specifics of working in the Moodle. So yes,
Okay.
the last 2 weeks, the part one and part two put together, should help to inform then what you're going to be doing through your Moodle.
Okay.
All right. Other
Now it's
questions?
fitting in.
Yep. Other questions? All right. Yeah, so before we get into the discussion, let me just recap a couple of things. And actually going off of what Kathleen was just saying. So at this point, or close to this point, both parts of your ID plan should be more or less complete. And one of the things I'm going to ask you to do over the course of this coming week is, at the top of your Moodles, you're just going to put your ID plan as a PDF. You're just going to attach it as a file. Normally, obviously, if this was actually being put in front of students, you wouldn't necessarily be putting your instructional design plan out there. But because these are projects, I just want to be able, when I go into your Moodles, to be able to quickly look and pull up your instructional design plan. As we go forward, things might change. I've had people in the past get a few weeks in and decide that the topic they picked really isn't right, or they want to do something different, or they want to take the Moodle in a different direction. And by all means, feel free that, that you've got the freedom to do that. If you do make significant changes, just go back to your instructional design plan and kind of rework it so that it reflects the current state of your Moodle. So the two should be linked to each other, and it should be basically a living document as you go forward. So, we talked about that idea of the rapid prototyping. So as you get into the Moodle project, if you discover things that aren't working the way you planned, it's okay to change your plans. Just make sure you go back and update the written plan to reflect those changes. So that'll pretty much wrap up the planning part. The other pieces of it, then there were a couple of questions or things that I saw come up in discussions that had to do with kind of the scope of the Moodle. And I just wanted to clarify this, maybe if there are questions. Basically, like, how big a topic are we looking to cover in these Moodle projects? And I think what I put in the description was, it's going to be bigger than a single class meeting, unless you happen to have class meetings that are a couple of hours long. But I also don't want you taking on something as large as, say, an entire unit. So if you're a social studies teacher and you teach, I'm not a social studies teacher, the Western expansion, I'm not looking for you to create a Moodle that covers all of the Western expansion. You'd be taking one piece of that. So, in terms of the sections, the topic should be large enough that you can get, let's say, between 6 and 10 segments out of it. So if you are thinking through your plan and it really only takes up like 2 sections, then you might want to expand that out a little bit. But if you find yourself getting into, 15 sections, 20 sections, then that might be a good signal to scale back a little bit. So whatever topic you're looking at, if you can segment it logically, instructionally, and it comes out to somewhere in that 5 to 10 section range, then that probably is a good sign that you're in the right ballpark in terms of the scope. The last section of the Moodle is going to be an assessment, so that's not really going to be an instructional piece. So you can keep that in mind as well. So, hopefully that clarifies. I just, in looking through the forum discussions, a couple places it came up about, well, how big should this topic be? Should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? So hopefully that helps to clarify that a little bit. And if you still have questions about that and want me to take a look specifically at what you've come up with, then I can absolutely do that, just to sort of confirm that you're in the right ballpark. When I inherited this course, there was a number on it. Each Moodle had to have 10 sections to it. And I just felt like that was too restrictive, too prescriptive. That didn't really reflect the needs of what you were teaching. So I'd rather you find a topic and then let it naturally evolve into the number of sections that are needed. So hopefully that is helpful for those of you that had brought up those questions. In terms of over the next week, we are going to be now shifting into production mode. I would say going through the next 4 or 5 weeks of the class. So we've kind of got our design phase. Now we're going to be actually going into the development phase where we're actually making the materials. So what you'll see over the next several weeks as we get into them is that each week we'll have a theme or a topic for a type of instructional material. So the first one we're going to look at is just graphics, like handouts, visuals, things like that. And we're going to take a look at some ways of improving graphics and graphic design for instruction. And then we'll be looking at video, we'll be looking at audio, we'll be looking at incorporating interactive web content. So each week will have kind of its own theme, where you'll learn a little bit about how to effectively engage with that mode. And then that then becomes a tool that you can then start to incorporate into your Moodles. So as we start learning about each of these types of content, if you realize to yourself, hey, I really, having a graphic for this section of my Moodle would be great. Once we've gone through graphics, then you can take that knowledge and start to plug things in. So I'm not going to necessarily have specific, you have to have this much stuff in your Moodle by this date. It's going to be more as you see the types of things and as you find the things that are useful for your Moodle, start plugging those in. Alongside that, and I try to be as efficient with this as I can, is as hopefully most of you have seen, Moodle has all these different activities and resources that you can use. And what I'm also going to be trying to do as we go through the next several weeks is that part of each week's work for the class will be done through a different type of Moodle activity. So that will also give you a chance to experience firsthand how each of those activities works. And then along the same lines as the materials, like say we do a database activity one week, you go through it as part of the class, and then you go, hey, wow, that would be a really great way for me to do this particular activity in my class. Then you can then use that. So I try to teach the different activities in the Moodle by having you actually use them and experience them and see what they're like, and then kind of go from there. So this kind of marks a dividing line between coming up with our plan, our instructional design plan. Now we're going to be shifting in the next couple of weeks into starting to create materials for the Moodle. So that just gives us a little bit of a heads up. And then finally, in terms of looking backwards, looking forwards, the technology integration plans, the phase one of those is due next week, technically. So hopefully you've had a chance to start looking at those. That's basically where you're trying to find existing technology integration plans and do a little analysis of them. And then by the end, hopefully come up with a topic or a subject that you want to explore for your own technology integration plan. So that phase one will be technically due next week. I will make phase two active next week, so you'll be able to start working on that next phase. And you'll have, again, several weeks to work on that second phase of that. All right, so hopefully that kind of catches us all up with where we are, where we're going forward. Then over the next week, there's not a lot of new work for you to do. I'm kind of used this week as a week just to get everything caught up and ready to go for the next phase. So there's a little bit of new work in the homework for tonight, but most of it is just making sure that you're caught up with everything we've done to date. All right, so any questions yet? Still? Just a bunch of shaking heads. That's okay. Ask if you've got them. Okay, so roundtable for tonight is the topic is this thing called the personalization principle. Something you maybe have run into in other contexts, maybe not. It's fine. I gave you the chapter from one of the texts that we do use for educational technology that's all about the personalization principle. It is not something that, of course, only applies to distance learning and to online instruction, but it certainly is important for that realm. But it obviously, having read through it, you probably saw that it can apply to a lot of different types of situations. So what I would like to do tonight is, for this discussion, is I've got just a one question that we're going to start off with us all together. And that is just to kind of make sure we've got a good handle on what the personalization principle is. Then, because we have so many in the class, trying to do a full roundtable online discussion with a dozen or more people can get really tricky in terms of everyone feeling like they get a chance to contribute. So we're actually going to break out into a couple of smaller rooms. and I will have a couple of questions for the breakout rooms to discuss in their smaller groups. And I'll try to circulate around through the groups and just kind of check in. We'll come back together, share out what your individual groups came up with, and then finish up with one or two more things that we will talk about as a full group. So hopefully by doing this, we get a chance to share all together as a full class, but also get a chance to maybe get a little more engaged in some smaller groups. So with that said, let's just start with the most basic of questions as we go into this, which is basically, what is the personalization principle? What does it mean? What does it look like? Somebody just feel free to jump in. Yes, Christy got her hand up first. Oh, I think she's still muted.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's the catchphrase of the past year has been, they're on mute.
I shouldn't do it because my students do it all the time, and I'm like, why are they talking with their mics off? So I shouldn't be the one doing that now. But
it's all good. It's all good. So take it away.
So I actually have never really heard of this, but the more I read about it, the more I realized I kind of do this naturally anyway. So it's this theory that basically states that learners will be more engaged, they will be making more of an effort to understand and learn better if they feel that they're engaged in kind of a conversation or part of a social interaction rather than just speaking to a computer or hearing from a computer. And this is done when they really feel like there's a human behind the content. So the three main things that I kind of pulled away that you can do this to kind of form those interactions is by having that conversational style rather than the formal style, using more first and second person language, being polite, using the on-screen coaches maybe to guide the learning process, and then the idea of putting a voice behind the author so that the students can make those connections. So all those things kind of make it so that students are more engaged in what they're learning, rather than the idea of, the presenter just puts the information out there and then the learner is just supposed to retain it. So this is a little more involved and more engaged.
Okay, excellent. Anyone want to take that and run with it, add to it, share other thoughts about it? Yeah, go for it, John.
Follow procedure here. Raise my hand.
Oh, that's okay.
So it uses social cues to engage the learner more, to what do they call it? To prime their cognitive. Hold on, I have it written down. We're priming though, to prime the brain for cognitive awesomeness.
Okay.
So the learner, like she was saying, like the learner feels more engaged when they're actually in a back and forth rather than just a one-way receiving information. And then, yeah, that's all I've got.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Yes, Alyssa.
I almost just talked the mic off too. It was that the students that used or had personalized lessons, they did substantially better with transfer tests than the people who did not, which was significant because when we're thinking about learning, we're always thinking about transferring those skills to other places. So personalization allows them to do better with that transfer.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Yeah, go. Oops, that was a... All right. Anything else?
It also said to consider your audience. So it had said, like, obviously I'm a second grade teacher, so I'm going to try to get my students involved differently than a high school teacher. And it also said, think about the cognitive consequences of how you're talking. So you want to put it out there in a sufficient way. You want to connect to your learners, but you also want to make sure that you're not so informal that your students are distracted or that you're not getting to what you need to because you're trying to connect.
Sure. Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's see. Christy. Oh, Mike.
Sorry, I'm doing it again. I gotta get used to this. Just to piggyback off of what I think Leah just said, they did mention that it should be a very subtle change because it can't be to the point where it does get distracting. So something as little as, putting the word you or we, just to make it a little bit more personal, can make all the difference. And it's just subtle, but yeah, definitely not so informal that it becomes distracting and then has the opposite effect.
Okay. Yeah, Gabby.
Yeah, also going off of what Leah and Christy were mentioning, one of the things that kind of resonated with me was they talk about using your direction as an invitation rather than a directive. And that's something we do a lot with the curriculum that I work with right now. I'm a language arts teacher. And so we kind of have to look for when your students or your audience is ready to take that step, and then in a very polite way, just kind of say, okay, well, maybe let's try to do it this way instead of saying, no, you're wrong, like do it this way.
Right,
So I
right.
thought that was actually really important for instruction.
Okay. Yeah, Kathleen, I think. Oh, microphone. There you go.
How's that?
You got it.
I have to find it. I didn't see it on the screen. I'm an English teacher too, so a lot of what I was reading in there applies to good writing skills and knowing your audience. So yeah, you're going to be always thinking in mind. And I said, yeah, that's a trap we get into in writing the descriptions. We get so involved in the content, we forget that we're writing to someone. And so we do have an audience, and so that should be in the writing of what we do.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's see, a couple more here. We're starting to bridge into what the next piece of the conversation is, so I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but let's see, Eric, I see you've got your hand up. Or went down? Up, down.
I just took it down as soon as you just called my name. No, it was really interesting reading through this, and then really, like, for me, what resonated was the focus on the social cues, because it's one of the things that we're trying to really do and work on with we call them scholars at our school. And part of the reason why I would miss one of the classes last week was we're struggling trying to get them online and putting the cameras on. And unfortunately, that wasn't something that was really pressed upon them at the beginning of the school year, as we're trying to make them really focus on wearing their masks. So right now, we're really, as we're starting our second semester, trying to focus on that. And one of the things that we've been arguing about as a staff is you can't gauge their social cues when the cameras are off. So a lot of what we're trying to do has been put out in just platforms where they're just reading, and putting the you or the I and making it more personalized has helped, but we can't gauge their social cues and their facial expressions by what they're writing necessarily, instead of what we can see with their cameras on.
Sure. Yeah, okay. And actually, like I said, we're already starting to bridge into what the next phase is, so I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here. So, we've got a great summary, and it sounds like from the reading, you've got a good idea of what the principle is and how it kind of fits into things generally. So what I'd like to do is, like I said, I'm gonna break us up into smaller groups. I think with the full 12 of us here, I'll probably do 3 groups of 4. And within each group, maybe sort of picking up from a couple of the suggestions that have already come out here, think about or discuss the following 2 things. Number 1 is, what is the direct application of the personalization principle to distance learning? And that can be either synchronous or asynchronous distance learning. Sort of how does this apply? How does it fit into the mix? And again, a couple of you have already started to suggest a couple of things along those lines. And then along with that, the second thing would be to discuss some implications. So understanding what the personalization principle is, understanding how it would connect to distance learning, what are some things that means for instructors, either in how instruction is developed or in how it is delivered, when it comes to engaging the personalization principle. So those two things: how does it apply to distance learning, and then what implications does that application have for instruction for instructors? All right. So, and then what we'll do when we come out is just quickly have each group just share out a couple of highlights. We don't have to recap entire discussions, but if you come out of it with a couple of key points for each group, then maybe one or two people from each group can be the spokesperson for their group and just share out quickly what they came up with. And then what we'll do finally back as a full group is I want to talk about sort of some concrete examples. And again, we've already gotten a couple which are great. And then also specifically now, how is this understanding maybe going to help shape what you do in your Moodles, in your Moodle projects? So, but we'll have that discussion when we come back together. So application to distance learning and implications for instructors. So I'm going to do this breakout room thing. To be honest, breakout rooms is something they just recently added to WebEx. So I've not used it in this format, so I'm hoping this will work well, but I'm going to send you into 3 rooms and it's just going to pick people randomly. So there we go, 3 sessions. So it's just going to randomly group you up into 3 groups of 4. And let's see, it's basically 5 o'clock. I'll try to circulate around, but maybe take, let's say, about 20 minutes or so to discuss, and then we'll come back together. If it looks like groups are wrapping things up earlier than that, then I may have people come back together before that. But let's plan on around 5:20 or so coming back together and doing some quick sharing out. All right, so we understand what we're going to do? All right, so here we go, crossing my fingers, and this should send you into your rooms.